Hi guys, thanks for coming. We heard a lot about healthcare already, and there are more panels and more talks to come. So just to give you a few ideas on the speakers and the setup we are planning. The first panel, you didn't have a chance to participate, but we really want to engage you because we're talking about patient care, primary care, and you are all patients. So there will be 2 volunteers that have microphones throughout the talk. Feel free to raise your hand. It's hard for me to see, but you know, if you make some noise, so we also want to hear your opinion. We want to hear your comments, and we're all here to answer your questions. Keep that in mind. We have 40 minutes to talk. I have 3 awesome speakers on stage, all with a very different background. Prateek, you're a doctor in neuroscience. We have a tech expert here from Ada Health, and we have Bart. And we just figured out that we are very international on stage. Bart says he's a European, grew up in Belgium, but in like it feels like 20 other European countries. Prateek originally from India, Eden, you're from Australia, and I'm born and bred in Germany, the only one probably here. It's my pleasure to talk to you about care, about the patient, because at the end, we talk about data, we talk about IoT, we talk about machine learning, but where do the data come from? The data comes in healthcare from the patient. The patient must be willing to show a kind of openness to share the data. And we also talk about very individual data in a way, because it's very private, it's personal. And if you're sick, it's not the most comfortable situation also sharing your greatest weaknesses. And we also talk about a huge amount of data that has to be handled in the healthcare area. You might have read the description of the panel. The numbers are quite compelling. 30% of the entire world's stored data is generated by the healthcare industry, but only a fraction of that data is actually used right now. So I'm super happy to learn more about how you, with Ada, collect data, work with data, you, Prateek, how you advise companies to actually use the data, and at the end also some ethical points of view. It would be great if you could explain a little bit more, what you do with data in your careers. Maybe starting with you, Eden.
Yeah, so hi, I work at Ada Health, where we have a symptom checker. So this collects data directly from the patient in terms of people are checking their symptoms to find out what's bothering them and to give them an idea of a potential diagnosis. So it's like a conversation with the doctor, and that's really where we provide a lot of value, is that you're having a conversation with the doctor, but it's collecting the data at the same time and then providing a personalized health assessment at the end of it.
How much data do you have?
Well, we have 1.6 million users so far that have completed around 2 million assessments so far. And it's really the way that we capture this structured information from the patient that's so different to, say, how an EHR works that we find. So you're having that personal conversation. And it's because it's with the chatbot, people share a lot because they're not so scared to share personal details because they're not embarrassed. So they're more willing to share sort of sexual health symptoms and other such symptoms. But then while you're having that conversation, like with the doctor, then we capture every point, every answer that you give, and that gives a very well-structured data set that then we can use to help improve the diagnostic process.
Looks like you found a way to convince the patients to share the data. What happens afterwards?
So afterwards, actually, we just use that data to improve the diagnosis process that we use. So we've got 2 services that we provide. First is we have a triage service that tells people, how urgent the problem is and whether they should see a doctor straight away or not. And the second part is the conditions that they're most likely to be suffering from. That service is all we use the data for, and we just use it as feedback to try to improve that service.
You're a young company, you're also not that large, but IBM and EY work with companies, or you at IBM also have a lot of clients dealing with a lot of data already for kind of years and years and years. What's the reason that a lot of data is not used for primary care? What do you think, Bart?
Well, data is the foundation of the transformation that will happen in the healthcare system, and data will be valued. And you see that in the startups. Most of the monetization of startups is when they have an exit and they sell data. We had an exit in Europe for my sugar, which was sold to Roche for 70 million. And it was about selling data to a big pharma company and 1 million users. So data is becoming very valuable. Within IBM, we are not a data-driven company. We are a B2B company, so our business model is not based on data monetization. So we don't invest up front by having data trades. So I have every week a call of some professor that tells me, I have this data, I have this great idea, can you finance a project? So like, no, we don't finance based on data. And I think it is, if you look in the future of healthcare, and if you look at the probably consolidation, and I'm going to talk later when I talk about it, what's going to happen, you will have platforms that consolidate data, primary healthcare data, genomic data, all kinds of data. And we really have to watch out that if we transform healthcare, that it doesn't get into a system where we become the same kind of user or consumer as we are having with WhatsApp or Facebook or data-driven business models, where you have no control. Like all my sugar patients were not asked, and they didn't have any consent that their data was transferred to Roche. And there was no meaning, or there's no step in the process that actually allows patients to decide if their data is being transferred. But it's a gap into the system that there is. A pharmaceutical company is not allowed today to have a direct-to-consumer service, but they're using startups. And I've been in a discussion yesterday, and went pretty long in the night, but we said that we need more money in the market, because otherwise, especially in Germany has the lowest IT budgets in healthcare. You never would expect that, but and if there's no money in the market for tools and not being spent on great solutions like ADA, they will start monetizing it in a very different way. And I think that is wrong. So we need to see, and I'm advocating for that there is more investments into solutions so the patient gets protected in that sense. And we had so many discussions in Germany about data protection, and it stopped kind of the evolution. But the only thing is about the monetization model, and we need more money in the market. We need more investments. Otherwise, you will see a buyout of personal data and not anonymized big data pools. And there's a difference between personal data, where my address, my name, my genomic profile is being sold, as there is in anonymized data. I think ADA is probably using anonymized data to improve the algorithms.
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't help you if you know that he lives in the Torstraße in Berlin. Probably it could, but you're not using that personal information, do you?
Yeah, so we use the region that they're in, so you're more likely to have malaria if you have a fever, if you're in a malaria-prone region. There's only about 4 regions in the world that we actually distinguish between.
But also data is not just data. There's smart data, there's sparse data, there's big data, individual data. If you talk about data, you also have chronic patients, one-time patients, all these different colors in healthcare. It's, as I said, very emotional. And I got the impression that there are a few issues. Money might be one. Access to data might be another one, but there's also a lot of data around, apparently. But there's a lack of strategy how to use the data, for primary care, for patients, and healthcare specifically, because, you have to see pattern to create biomarkers, and that pattern is not necessarily there yet, because you have to understand data in a different way. What are the strategies? I think, Prateek, you're working on that.
Yeah, so I'm working for Ernst & Young at Frankfurt office. My background is life science, and I usually work on how to make data meaningful, specifically not for any one particular stakeholder, but all around the ecosystem. Yeah? So it involves healthcare organizations, life science, and also patients. Yeah? So how you can make data meaningful for patients. And this is a question also a lot of life science organizations are asking that how they can go ahead and develop apps and all these kind of things. I think you have touched already on that kind of topic. But they have huge amount of data from real-world electronic health record, genomic data, profiling data. And sometimes they come to a question that what we can do with this. Yeah? So what we should do it with this data, what kind of case, different kind of pilot studies we can start. And then they have to do some kind of strategy to build up that these are really relevant topic, patient-centric, and we have to develop those kind of things. And I think one of the most I'd say one of the most promising cases is to develop some patient-centric app, yeah, going towards a personalized medicine. And the whole data is giving rise to the personalized medicine, where without this access to the data, both of you have touched on this, you cannot develop this new biomarkers or new stratifications among the patient population. And I think there are new theories coming up, how one could have access to this data, especially from the patient-centric point of view. And I think the patient is going, according to GDPR, we were talking about this in the previous panel, the patient is going to get the full power of his own data. So think about models where a blockchain, patient having power to his data, allowing access to several different companies. I know some patients in US having cancer, and they take their data, request the data from doctor, from the hospital, put it online, and look for bioinformaticians that can you help me to find an individual strategy or therapy for me? What kind of drugs will work for me? Combinations. I know some MIT researchers. They told me this story. Some friends of mine. They have a startup developing reports for individualized patients. They are not contacting doctor, but directly patients. So patients are approaching them, which is a sign of that patient is getting the power of not day-to-day data, but also their genomic data. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward that this overall ecosystem is getting up over the time, and I think we will be able to solve this governance issues as well. But definitely, the patient centricity is very important.
Yeah, I think.
Let me comment on that. I think patient empowerment is this keyword, but a patient is not empowered, is not a payer, it doesn't have consuming powers. Although we talk about this, in our socialized healthcare systems, the patient doesn't pay bills. So there is no behavior, economic behavior that he looks at price, quality, where is data from. So it's a nice thing to talk about, but I don't think that's reality, that patients are empowered. If you look at data, even in a blockchain, you have personal data, but that's not the value. The value is when you get cohorts of 200, 300 million of data sets. And if you see what Amazon is doing, Amazon is having a project called 4092. The title already tells quite a lot about what their mission is. They will do most of the substantial research, and you look at personalized, you at genomic, epigenomic lifestyle data. So data is going to define who's going to be the winner and the loser. It is value. And if we talk about data and tell we have to open source it, it would be the same thing as telling Saudi Arabia has to open source their oil. It just doesn't work. It's something that you value, and it's something that an economy is based on. And it's something that gets monetized. I give you an example. Zebra Medical Vision, a startup in Israel that now uses AI to diagnose radiology images. They're asking $1 per diagnosis worldwide. So they are in this deception phase where they just burn venture capital to just get data. So it's the same trap that people start using it. They will have 800 million, 1 billion on funding until they get the algorithms that are the most accurate. And as we know, once you have the algorithm and you are the best and the most accurate, there is no second platform. We don't look at Microsoft with Bing. They tried so hard to get a second search engine. Look at Yahoo. There is only Google search. Well, this will happen in healthcare as well. there will be one platform that will have most of the data, and it will monetize it. So, all true, patient empowerment, but the knowledge will not come out of a blockchain, the knowledge will not come out of our personal data, the knowledge will come out of cohorts. And we have to really discuss, again, business models and investments. Do we want to invest upfront into the development of these algorithms, or do we want to get monetized on our data, as we did with WhatsApp, as we did with Facebook, as we did with all the others? And I think it's a very ethical question to ask as a European, where we have socialized healthcare systems and the best ones in the world. Germany has one of the best healthcare systems. We spend 11.2% of our GDP, and we get everything for free. If you look at the US, they spend 18.5% of their GDP. They have 4 years of lower lifetime expectations. They have 40 million people not insured. Do we really want that? Do we really want to get a healthcare system based on values and ethics that comes from a country that looks at healthcare as a business and not as something as a pillar for society? And so that's all about monetization.
I agree with you. And these are some of the open questions, I think, in the space, especially in the industry. But there are different aspects to it. I was talking to a head of an insurance company from Zurich, and we were talking about population health management. So population health management is a kind of a concept which is very popular in US, using data from the overall population. And if a company who's controlling this population health management prevent a patient to get serious, they get paid for that. Yeah? So this concept is also slowly jumping into the Europe to save some cost around the healthcare, or to give better care, especially from the primary point of view, that you don't need to go to a specialist or something. But the health insurance managing director, I still remember his sentence. He said, I don't love this population health management because in Zurich, in Switzerland, I have to make the government force me not to have long-term contracts. I have short-term contracts for these insurances, so I don't want to invest money on population health management for the patient. Might be German government wants to do that because there's a law on the long-term contracts that insurance cannot force you out, so they have to reduce costs. So there are, I think, depending upon the country, there are different business models. Different people want to use data in a different aspect. But I think definitely there are several open questions with regard to this.
And yeah, in my mind, the solution is to be focusing on patient needs. That if you're really meeting a real need for the patient, then you can monetize that and gain value from that. So, like for example, at Ada, the type of needs that we fulfill for a patient are, they need to know, whether they should go and see a doctor, and if we fulfill that need, we get people to come in and use it, but that has follow-on effects to the health system. So by keeping people away from the health system, we save, for example, save insurance companies money, and that can be monetized. But also we catch people early, to tell them to go to a doctor early, and we save costs on the health system that way. And so it makes the whole system more efficient. But as long as you're focusing on what you're doing for the patient, and that's sort of where you can get the value from, I think.
But being 18 years in the business, the system doesn't want to reduce cost. I was pretty naive, and I started thinking that health insurers would be interested in reducing costs. They don't. So, and that's the main issue. If you look at disruption and transformation, it will not most probably happen within the system, and that's why you guys are out there, like Ada. But then at the same time, you need a monetization model, and there we're talking about healthcare, but and you have a global app. In Africa, there is no healthcare system. It's an out-of-the-pocket payment system. In India, most probably, it's out of the pocket.
Yeah.
So I advise startups to start there. because it's like the Chinese building roads and highways in Africa to get the new resources, which were copper mining or whatever it was. So you see a lot of startups focusing on building solutions for free to get the data and the access. And it will become that what builds your algorithm that will deliver the value that people will paying for, or insurances will pay for. So it is really hard to, there's not even a European healthcare market. There's not even a German healthcare market. You have in each state in Germany, you have different data protection rules. We can't set up a service that serves all of the need in terms of legal needs that would be able to scale. So there's a lot of issues around scaling services, collecting data. And we all know that in 10 years from now, data will be the foundation that will help us to even prevent most of the diseases that we are trying to cure in that system. So we're not going to have diseases anymore in 20 years. We will be having biomarkers, as you said, that will be based on minimal invasive technologies that will allow us to prevent. And there is a startup in Berlin, Zurich. It's based, they're doing, they have a patch on your skin, and they're collecting blood, and they're detecting 20 different biomarkers, and they're doing supplementation, or they're offering a closed loop that you get at home. You send being a box with your supplementation nutrition. So you will see more of these closed loop systems coming out and delivering services, but at the same time trying to collect as much data as possible. And I don't know the answer on it, but and I've been lobbying, bad word, but I've been lobbying now with the government in Germany that I think Germany has a chance to use data protection laws and to invest in services and creating platforms to make the healthcare system globally a public good. That sounds like a crazy idea, but I believe that if you look at a teaching hospital which is responsible for research, that you can develop them as a platform, and that they would be able to create an API system that would scale their knowledge, which they're doing today. They're doing research, but the knowledge is being published into a study or into a journal or into a book. Well, you would publish the knowledge into a service, into an API, and you would give that service free, out of the box, available for the whole world. And I think that would completely change the system, because we would use the public healthcare system to transform data, the system through data, but we would call it not made in Germany, but protected by Germany. And we would be able to not monetize on it. And we would be able to transform and give a healthcare system to countries like India or Africa, where the main problem always has been brain drain. In Africa, 9 out of 10 doctors leave the country after they studied. So they haven't been able to build up a healthcare system.
But it also means what you say is there are more than 300 mobile apps out there. There are more than 300 wearables collecting data actively and passively, that a majority of them won't survive because they won't have a necessary number or the data sets they need to actually detect pattern biomarkers, to do. Everybody talks about big data and AI. How many of these companies actually have that resource to do a meaningful business out of that? I mean, you are lucky because you're also not active in Germany. You're active in other countries and regions as well that are a little bit more, I wouldn't say lax, but open to share data. So does it mean, we have data scientists sitting here probably thinking, oh, I want to do something in health. How do I get enough data to run a meaningful business? Because just with a serious amount of data, you probably can monetize. So is it a system that is broken from the beginning? Will I ever have enough data as a small company to run a business?
I think we actually had a unique approach to that we started without data, and we're able to produce a service that what we did is get doctors to produce create content for us and produce the service and have it based on the doctors encoding these rules, and built a probabilistic model that then was able to provide a service to users, and then people came to use it because they found it useful. and then we're able to collect data from that and constantly make the service better. So sometimes you can start without data. You can sort of bootstrap it in a way.
Yeah, so for example, there's a use case which I was thinking about on this. There are some open source possibilities which you can get from, especially around the health data from NIH, or there are some open source softwares as well which you can use for this. But the most important thing is how correct the initial MVP is you are building. For example, the big problem currently a lot of startups are facing, which I see, is I was talking to a startup working on neurological disorder, specifically diagnosing Alzheimer and Parkinson. So just to give a background, Alzheimer and Parkinson, there are a lot of drugs coming up in after 2020, 21, 22. And most of the pharma companies are currently struggling that how they're going to assess whether the drug is working. Because the test in order for the Alzheimer and Parkinson, whether it's growing or stable, is most of the time invasive. They have to take out fluid from your cerebrospinal fluid and test it, which is, first of all, expensive. And I'm sure that you don't want to do this on the weekly basis. Yeah? So a lot of startups trying to identify pattern in the speech, on body movements and everything. And definitely there are some interesting ones in the US, but especially the ones in Europe are currently struggling to get access to the data from the Uniclinicum or data from the studies. And I think this is something where German government has to look. Yeah? Exactly what you said, the lobbying to push, get access, startups out there. If you want, as a country, you want to go up, you should give opportunity, an ecosystem, a place where startups can flourish. And it's not only the money. There are several other things next to it.
So one of the things that you can do is, there are like 980,000 people dying a year in Germany. So I've been advocating for a data donation law. So like when you die, you donate your organs, but when you die, you donate your data. If you would do that on a European level, that would be 7 million longitudinal data sets that would create a year. If you are dead, you don't have any rights. So, nobody cares about insurance policies or life insurance, all these bad stories about data. So I think there are ways that we can create an ecosystem that will allow us to get access to data, which is not connected to the big problem that people that would abuse data for insurance policies or other really dystopian views of the world. But I think there are ways to do this. The funny thing is, when I ask politicians and things, have you ever discussed the data donation law, that this hasn't been thought of because it doesn't serve anyone. It didn't serve anyone at that moment. So I'm trying to, and I hope that we will be able to get a data donation law in place. And if we do that on a global scale, that's like, you would create 100 million of longitudinal data sets a year, but then everything needs to be digitized. So there are ways that you can liberate data without having the ethical or other issues around it.
And that's one big challenge about getting access to data. But another one we found at Ada is to do with the quality of data. So, so we've looked at looking at improving our system using the large amounts of data that are available from EHRs, for example. Like I know there's a large database available from the NHS that has, I think 70 million EHR records that you can get access to for research purposes. And the trouble with that is, I think it's a great tragedy, I think, in terms of the setting up of the EHRs, because they were set up for mainly to automate the paper system into a more automated, more efficient system, and also for insurance and compliance and legal reasons. But what they didn't put in mind when they were designing these EHRs are the machine learning applications that you could use these for. So that they weren't people to say, hey, collect data in this exact way so you can build a machine learning model to predict people's future health and diagnose disease. And so that wasn't thought of at the beginning, and that needs to be baked into the way it's collected. And so what ends up is these EHRs are actually have very poor quality data. So most of them you can't use, and I've seen people use models on these that just revert to a bag of words. So they treat the EHR as just this lump of text, so there's no structure in it at all. And that's why I think going to the patient is where the future is. So moving from doctors collecting it. Also, doctors don't have much time. They really are time limited to really sit down and collect the data in a very structured, well-formed data set. Whereas if we put it in the hands of the patient, they have all the time in the world to invest in setting up this data set for themselves to manage their own health.
Yeah. So we have like 5, 6, 7 minutes left. These guys know how to access data. They also have some advice. So raise your hand if you have any question, let us know, or come up. We have a microphone so you can actually talk to them. It's an open invitation. Otherwise, we keep talking. But keep that in mind. It's your chance to ask. Microphone? Or if you just say it and I repeat it. Okay.
Thank you very much for that overview. One thing that came to mind is that some of these systems are being used to sell a service that is based on dodgy reasoning. A lot of the, for instance, personalized medicine products out there now go far beyond what the evidence shows is possible with personalization. So how do you think in the future citizens will be able to distinguish between apps and interfaces that are based on solid scientific evidence and ones that have just been set up by a fly-by-night a type of startup trying to sell a product based on sort of quack medicine?
So
it's a trust question, I guess.
That's one thing I can answer. We've been looking to at Ada because so we've got a symptom checker, and other companies can release a symptom checker and say we've got 99% accuracy. And so what we're looking at now is partnering with independent institutions, like research institutions, to do a independent study of the accuracy of these services and the safety of them, and to do a review of those. So and a centralized. And I actually come from a background. I was the original developer of the Kaggle platform. And it's very much related to the idea that you can all compete and on a data set and then come up with a particular result, and and that sort of democratization of it.
I think it's a really interesting question, because what you're asking is how much do we have to regulate versus how much do we have to liberate the market. If you look at healthcare, it's the most inefficient economy in the world because there is so much regulation. If you look at education, it's the same thing. Like from all the industries, these are the most regulated industries and the most inefficient. So regulation doesn't lead to efficiency either. So today's healthcare systems are just not perfect in terms of there's a lot of interest in disease. There's not an interest in prevention. 99% of our spending is on disease, not on prevention. So to give you a question back in terms of what is the reality today is, well, it's focusing on a disease market and not on a prevention market. So I hope that the data-driven platforms will transform that and create a market out of prevention and make money out of getting or letting people being healthy. And that will be proven by feedback loops, outcome-driven systems that will prove the value. But I agree that if you completely open it, you will get, as they say in German, Quacksalver. I don't know the term in German, but in English, but like people that would create a service that has no value, and people would believe it. But I think we have to watch out with regulations, because if we over-regulate, there's a very interesting study from Harvard Law School that looked at malpractice in the US. So malpractice is the law that when a physician makes a mistake, you can sue the physician, or you can make a lawsuit. So if you leave a hospital in the US, there is an assistant lawyer standing there with his business card, and each physician in the US spends $40,000 a year on insurances. And what they saw in that study is that the regions that have the most protective malpractice laws that protect patients have the lowest outcomes. And that demonstrates that if you start regulating more, you don't create a better healthcare system, but physicians in these malpractice best protected regions, they're not doing that anymore. So if it translated to algorithms, and we would start suing companies that create a good algorithm, we have to watch out there. And I think that it will be a fine balance to find a balance between what is the value for society versus the value for the system. But it's the question that there is no single answer on it. Yeah. But I would tend to regulate less than more.
We are very philosophical. We have time for one last question. Sorry.
Just to add, addition to this, just to give you, from the oncology perspective, cancer therapies, FDA have allowed from the personalized medicine level to go up to, if you have one patient in one clinical trial. That was never the case. They want as many as possible now, but now, because the new therapies are coming on the very personalized level, taking out your DNA, making a vaccine out of it, injecting back. So even single patient level of therapies are, that much kind of outlook is there. But why? Because it's working. There is treatment, on the treatment level it's working, at least in 60 or 70% of the patients, not in all. And the research industry is still looking up to why it's not working in the rest of the 30% of the patient, and the answer is in the data.
So I think we now have no time for another question because we also have another keynote coming up with Bart. What I took out is, Bart, you're lobbying, which is not a negative word, for a data donation law. What are you up to next year, Prateek? Like, what's your mission, the lobbying mission you go for?
I would like to encourage all over the ecosystem to be more patient-centric. Whoever is usually I work with the clients, I tell them build patient-centric apps and think of future. If patient has the power of data, how you are going to run your company and what will be your business model.
And I think you even said you're going into machine learning next year.
Yeah, machine learning, but also, providing real value to patients. Actually providing services using machine learning that will change your life.
Perfect. So all three speakers will be here throughout the day. Some will be upstairs. Bart will be on stage. So reach out to them. Use the opportunity. If you have any data questions, we are here to interact with you, to give our experience to you, to learn from you, basically also. And thanks for listening to us, and thanks for a great discussion, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.